All right, 7.2. Going over the other direction from yesterday. Most of it we already covered, so I'm going to go quick. Okay, we talked about there's 6 ways to prove a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. For each method, you're going to give the symbols and state what angles or segments are being congruent or parallel. So right here, if I give you this definition, that opposite sides are parallel, you need to mark the diagram like this, and then give me a statement in symbols that say what's parallel to what. So, first time we're going to say we're going to mark the sides that are parallel. So let's say we start out with AD and BC. Those are parallel. Well, I've got to actually write down the symbols. AD is parallel to BC. I'm testing about whether or not you understand what the parallel symbol means and if you can identify the segments involved. But I'm going to tell you all of this part up here. It's going to be on the test. That's the question. And then from this, you have to say what's parallel to what and do all of that. So, then we go to the next set of opposite sides, DC and AB. We mark them as parallel, and we write down the symbols DC is parallel to AB. All right, that's your test question hint. Okay, you're going to see exactly this exact same thing on the test, exactly how you see it now. All right, so if I tell you that they are congruent, we're no longer talking about parallel, we're talking about congruence. So when I actually mark the diagram, it's going to look like little tick marks. So this is the question, the actual wording of the question. Use symbols, write 2 congruent statements to prove that the quad is a parallelogram because both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. This is what you're going to see on the test, this question. So now we have to mark the opposite sides as congruent, tick marks. I've got to write down the symbol that it talks about. AB is congruent to DC. Then we do the next set of opposite sides, AD and BC. And we say, well, what? I just told you that AD is congruent to BC, now just write it out. We say AD congruent BC. That's the test question right there. Exactly how you'll see it. So now we're talking about the same congruence, but now we're talking about opposite angles. So when you see a test question that looks something like this, using symbols to write the congruent statements for both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. Notice opposite angles. On this test question, I want you to mark the diagram as opposite angles are congruent. Now I've said that angle D is congruent to angle B, but I can't say that because there's too many angle B's. There's actually 3 different angle B's. So I need to specify with the full 3 letters what angle I'm talking about. And it's going to be A, B, C. All right, so I say angle ABC. Got to use the 3 letters. All right, so ABC right here, see that? I'm talking about angle B, but that B's in the middle. Angle D, well, D's in the middle, and I say ADC. So that's my first set of angles. Now I talk about the other set of opposite angles. Again, I can't just say angle A and angle C. So then I need to use the other set of angles. Sorry, I had to pause for a second. And again, I have to use all 3 letters. DAB, notice A is in the middle. It's DAB. That's the whole angle that I'm talking about. All right, actual test question right there for you. Now here, you might get some questions where it says consecutive angles are supplementary. Okay, so consecutive angles specifically means right here. They add to 180. They're next to each other. We talked about the order of your siblings is consecutive. So here's me, my older brother Steve, John, and then Jenny, my older sister. Okay, they're consecutive. They're in a row. Now I can go this direction or I can go this direction. Either way, B and D are consecutive to A. So now I got to mark this down. I pick any angle I want, angle D, and I write that angle twice. I say ADC and ADC. Now I find my consecutive angles. That's angle C and angle A. So we write down angle C adds to 180 and angle A adds to 180. Okay? This is what I want on this test question right here. And it doesn't have to be angle D. You can pick any one you want. But that's kind of where we're at. Okay. Next one. Bisecting each other. When I say the word bisect, it's like cutting a frog in half, a dissecting. we call it bisecting. So then we talk about, if I give you a test question using this definition here, can you mark the diagram properly with symbols and with a congruent statement? So I pick the diagonal. Let's talk about the red diagonal, AC here. Well, if it's dissected or bisected, it means I cut it in half, 2 equal pieces. So I mark it as such, 2 equal pieces, and then I have to write the congruent statement. Well, this isn't saying that AC is congruent to AC, it's saying that AF is congruent to AF, or FC, sorry. AF congruent to FC. Okay, so I got that done. Now I look at the other diagonal, the blue one, DB. Okay, so I say, well, it cuts it in equal halves, so I mark it that way. And then I write down my congruent statement. I say DF is congruent to FB. And we're done. It's an actual test question. Just like that. You're going to see it exactly like that on the test. Now here's a new one. It's also a parallelogram if one pair of opposite sides of a quadrilateral is congruent and parallel. So right here, if I have DC is congruent to AB and DC is parallel to AB, then we're going to have a parallelogram. It's kind of interesting. There's a lot of cool math that goes into proving this. But for what I need for the test question is you pick a pair of opposite sides. We're going to use these DC and AB. Well, then I got to mark them as parallel and state that they're parallel. And then I also have to mark them as congruent with a single tick mark. And then also state the congruence, that DC is congruent to AB. This is the final step. This is what I want for the test question right there. And I want you to mark the diagram like this. Not very complicated, but it's a good way to prove things are congruent. So now we're going to get into, here's all the 6 methods. I want you to know every single one of these 6 methods for the test. And I'm going to give you their definitions. You don't have to memorize them. Just make sure you know them. So fill in your essential question with these 6 methods. All right, so now we're going to go into coordinate proofs. And don't worry about the word proof. It's not really doing proofs. All I'm asking you to do is show me that it's a quadrilateral. We're not doing the whole 2-column stuff. We're just doing prove it's a quadrilateral, basically. Now, there's a bunch of different methods we can use in coordinate geometry to prove the parallelograms are the same. So right here, if I wanted to say that the opposite sides are congruent, that means that they need to be the same length. So I can use the distance formula to prove that AB is the same length as DC. So we kind of do this in multi-steps, okay? I'm going to give you the problem like this, and you're going to have to plot the points. So we plot A, B, C, D. And if you can plot that right there, that's the first of your 3 points, just for graphing it correctly. Also, it's supposed to be a parallelogram. So if you graph it and it doesn't look like a parallelogram, let's say you accidentally put D up here somewhere, then you did it wrong. It's supposed to look like a parallelogram. Just a hint. All right, so yeah, right there, it doesn't look like one. You've made a mistake. All right, now to prove it's a parallelogram, we're going to use the distance formula first. This is the most complicated one. It's the one that I don't recommend you use, but on the homework you're going to have to do it at least 3 times. But on the test, I hope you can pick an easier method than this. So here's your distance formula for AB. Notice how it's blue in front and then red in back. Okay, so we plug in our numbers. We do the algebra. 5 goes there, -3 goes there, 8 goes there, 5 goes there. Good. That gives me 8 squared plus 3 squared. That gets me 64 plus 9, gets me square root of 73. You do not have to reduce any of these, okay? So now I do the same thing again for BC. There it is. So don't simplify. Just leave it right there like that. Because all I'm trying to do is show that BC is congruent to something else. So it's easier to do it without simplifying. So right here, I do CD now. And I go through here and I square them and I add them together and I say 73. Notice here that 73 and 73 are the same length. That's something we can use to show that it's a parallelogram, right? Opposite sides are congruent. Okay, so now we do again for DA. and we go through and I show that it's actually the square root of 40. Okay, so if you need to pause the video to show these steps at any point, feel free to do so. I went pretty quick, but rewind, pause, however you need to do it to get these down in your notes correctly. But I strongly recommend you follow this structure here. How you bring it straight down, all the way down. Write out your full distance formula, plug in your pieces, and work your way down every single time. It's worth it. Okay, so now that I've got this distance formula set up, I can say now doing all this calculations was just 1 point. Now, after that, we're going to show 1 point for graph, 1 point for calculations. The last point is for your congruent statement. Okay, so quadrilateral ABCD is a parallelogram because both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. Okay, so you write down this sentence and you'll be just fine. Full points. Okay, this will help you with problems 15 through 17 on your homework. All right, now I can also use the parallel lines. I can show that two lines are parallel by showing they have the same slope. So I use the slope formula, which is on your cheat sheet, and I can use this to show that they are parallel. So let's look at AB first. Okay, so I plug in my values for AB, and I say it's 3/8. This one's way easier. You just do, there you go, slope, 3/8. Y2 minus Y1, X2 minus X1, and we're done. So now I do it for BC again, and I solve, and I get 6/2. I do it for CD. Again, pause wherever you need to pause to get these down in your notes correctly. But I'm just doing the midpoint, or the slope formula for C and D. Now notice how this is negative 3/8 and 3/8. Over here, I'm going to write it as 3/8 because a negative over a negative is a positive. So, and then over here, I get dA, and I get 6/2. Here I have negative 6/2. It doesn't matter which one's which. They're still congruent. So 1 point for graph, 1 point for calculations, and 1 point for this statement. Since the opposite sides are parallel, it's a quadrilateral, or a parallelogram, sorry. This will help you with 21 through 23 on your homework. All right, now this is Ms. Kerfman's favorite. It requires the least amount of calculations. It's the midpoint formula. So if you use the diagonals bisect each other, by definition of midpoint, F is now the midpoint of DB and of AC. So if I can do the midpoint formula for 2 points, AC, and find out that it's F, and then I do it again for DB and find out it's the same location, then I'll know it's a parallelogram. So it requires only 2 calculations. So we use our points. I want to find out the midpoint of AC because in the picture, AC are opposite of each other. So I plug in my values and I reduce. Okay, but I don't have to go any further than this. I don't have to simplify, just leave it alone. Once you add these together, then just leave it. Okay, now I do it for BD. I plug in my values and I combine them. And again, I don't have to simplify. I just say, look, 4 halves, 4 halves, 7 halves, 7 halves. It's the same location. And therefore, since it's the midpoint of both of them, that means that the diagonals bisect each other, and that means that it's a parallelogram. So that's going to help you with 18 through 20. I want you to try each one of these on your homework, so that way when you get to the test, you'll be able to pick which one you want to do, and because you'll know how to do it easier. Okay, so since the opposite sides of a quadrilateral are congruent and parallel, we're going to pick, well, we've already done the work for it, right? We've already done, from example 15, it's root 73 and root 73, and 3/8 is the slope, and 3/8 is the slope. So I know that AB is congruent to CD, and I also know that it's the same slope, so it's parallel. So based on that, I can just make this one statement and cite these examples here as to why it is congruent and parallel. All right, now, if you want to pause and get that in there, that's fine. It's going to help you with 24 through 26. Fill in your summary, and make sure you do this. This is free points. It's not very hard. You learned about how to do coordinate geometry, full sentences and all that jazz. So now here's the calendar looking at further in the week. Don't forget on Saturday, November 1st, coming in for help from Miss Kerfman. And there's